Welcome everyone who is trickling in. I will probably get started in, let's say, 30 seconds. Okay, we're at 31, so I think I'll get started. Welcome again to this talk. Today, I'm super excited to be talking about this topic. It's something very, very near and dear to my heart. Just to give a quick intro before getting into the topic. Hello, my name is Sophie. I am CEO and founder at a company called Formation. We actually help engineers from non-traditional and underrepresented backgrounds break into top tech companies. But before that, I started as an engineer myself. I was an engineer at Facebook and at Nextdoor for many years. And I was one of the people that was super involved in thinking about interviewing, hiring, onboarding, mentoring our new software engineers. And I probably interviewed many hundreds of people during my time there. And I was constantly finding that engineers from, underrepresented non-traditional backgrounds were oftentimes shortchanging themselves and not getting the roles that they deserved. Um, and so this is what kind of brings me to this topic. I am actually someone who really struggles with confidence, and it's one of the big themes of what I want to talk about today. When I was early in my engineering journey, just learning to code, I remember that I couldn't figure out how to do my work in university, and I was getting a friend to help me, and the friend had to take a break or something and go do something and asked me to figure out a problem on my own. And I remember just feeling completely lost after they left. I didn't know how to get started. And when they came back, I had made literally no progress. And I remember they told me that they didn't realize how much I was struggling, but that if I couldn't even figure out this pretty simple for loop, that I might not be cut out to be an engineer and I should reconsider if this is the path that I wanted to go down. And I really felt like that comment held me back kind of early in my journey. And today I see engineers that are honestly infinitely better than I was when I graduated CS struggle with the same topic of confidence and understand how to approach interviews, and not have it be this like thing that just I don't know, causes kind of that sense of fear and paralysis. And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about technical interviews today. And actually, on the topic, you might be thinking, what does it even mean by underrepresented? Like, aren't interviews the same for all people? I've worked with hundreds of engineers from all kinds of backgrounds, from super pedigreed engineers with CS backgrounds and 10 years of experience, all the way to self-taught engineers with zero experience. And I think different people have different struggles. And I have lots and lots to say to kind of super senior engineers with loads of experience. But today, I'm actually going to focus on the patterns that I have found specifically for people from non-traditional backgrounds in the early years of the career. And I think this can range anywhere from like 0 years of experience all the way up to like maybe 5 or 6 years of experience. But anyway, nothing obviously super specific, but that's kind of like where I'm targeting this talk. Okay, so we're going to get into a bunch of facts versus myth. Why is this not centered? One second. There we go. Okay. So this is the first myth that I want to talk about. It is a very common belief to hold, which is that, people think that they need to know the right answer to pass a technical interview. Now, you may have heard this before. And at this point, I think a lot of people are aware, like, hey, it's not just about knowing the right answer. But I think that the fact is, right, like that it's not about knowing the right answer. It's actually you have to figure out, and not just the right answer, but one right answer, right? One solution that works for the problem at hand. And the key thing here is that since you have to figure it out, when you're first presented a problem, the first 10 to 50% of the interview, you will not yet know the solution to the problem. And that's very normal. I think that I have found a lot of engineers, they get a problem and they almost immediately, sometimes you do, right? Sometimes you do almost immediately know the answer. You're like, oh, wow, yeah, this is just how I solve it. But that's actually not the typical. Right. And so what I find is that when people get a question and they don't immediately know the answer or feel like they're pretty close to getting an answer, they enter kind of this like flight or fight or flight kind of response where they almost start panicking. And even though they're trying to appear calm, it is really showing through that they are just immediately from the beginning grasping at straws, trying to figure out the answer as quickly as possible. And just the first thing to keep in mind is if you don't know the answer yet, and it's a third of the way through the interview, even, that's still fine. You're totally doing great. Stay confident and keep on going. And so, I guess, like, how do you keep on going? Right? Like, you're like, great, I can't just turn up my confidence dial, right? Well, so I want to focus then on actions. What are some of the actions that you can be taking that are fully in your control? So, the first thing, and actually, is there any chat? I'm curious. I don't know how. Oh, yes. I'll be happy to share the. I'm just seeing the slides. I'm so sorry I didn't see everyone saying hello, hello everyone. I am happy to share the slides afterwards. Full transparency. I made these slides mostly as a guide for us to have a conversation to like keep us on pace, but um, a lot of what I'm saying is not listed in the slides. Um, and just to kind of keep this casual. And I'm happy to answer questions live, by the way, and receive comments from you guys. But I'm more than happy to share the slides, of course, afterwards. Um, the so the first thing, and I'm curious if anyone has any guesses. Like, what do you think the first thing you should do is when you get presented a prompt? And if anyone has any answers to that, feel free to type it in the chat. But I actually have, write down the facts, read the question thoroughly. These are great, actually. And I'll come back to write down the facts, actually. Yes, I love this last one. So ask clarifying questions. I almost wonder if you've read anything that I've written before, because that's exactly how I phrase it, is to ask clarifying questions. Um, and I think that a lot of people now know this, but they are almost afraid because they feel like a question means that they don't know what they're doing, and that's not the point at all. In fact, a lot of times, the all of the facts of the problem are not even given to you, right? The whole point is to withhold some amount of the information so that you can discover the bounds of the problem yourself, right? And one, if you can't think of any questions to ask, oh, I think a lot of times people end up asking. Sometimes when I give this tip, sometimes what ends up happening is people will start asking kind of just like really kind of super edge case questions, right? And I think like the first types of questions that you should ask is actually to help you. Like, these questions should be helpful to you. You're not just asking them to check off this box, right? And so one really good question category to ask is actually coming up with your own examples. So by the end of this phase of the interview, you should be an expert at this question. Like, if you were to give this question to someone else, anyone should be able to ask you a question about the prompt and you should have an answer. And so come up with your own examples, right? So like, you're like, okay, so if I was given, this as the input array, I think this would be like would this be the right like output, right? And you're confirming again, I think I see confirming how what you understood the question to be and aligning with your interviewer on like the right inputs and outputs. And then from there, right, you have actually a very natural segue to um, starting to solve the problem manually, right? Like forget code. Code is like far away right now. But if you were to sort an array, for example, right? Like how would you do this as a manual human being, right? And then just try to work through an example input and just observe what you are doing yourself manually. And then you can start slowly codifying like what you're doing into a routine that can then be codified into code, right? Um, but what I find is like if you really just focus on, let me just explore this problem, let me ask a few questions, let me come up with a few of my own examples, you kind of get past that phase of the interview where you're in like kind of paralysis mode and you enter like, you almost forget that you're in an interview if you can get through that first few steps. So that's first myth and fact. The next one is another one that so many people think that getting hints during an interview means that you're doing badly. Now, I don't like to sugarcoat things. I do think that there is such a thing as getting too many hints, and getting too much help. There is some upper limit, but it is not anywhere near what people think that it is, right? And there's a lot of reasons that you might get a hint during an interview. You actually might get a hint because you're saying something that's correct, that's on the right track, right? And the interviewer is really excited. It's like, oh yeah, so what does that mean, right? And nudging you to get to that next thing. Another thing is honestly the interviewer is trying to collaborate with you, right? Like the part of the interview is not just like seeing if you can get a right answer, but how well you're able to collaborate, right? And so one kind of yeah, pair programming, exactly. And so one thing that I have as a tactical action you can take in response to receiving a hint is actually get really excited about it. Right? If the person says something, you're like, oh my God, that's such a good point. Thank you. Instead of what I see sometimes people doing is I can almost read that they think that they're doing a bad job and they're like, ah, shit, like, I didn't think of that, damn it, right? And I can see that causes a little bit of spiral in the thought process. Um, as opposed to be like, oh wow, that's such a good point, yeah, let me try to build on that. So let me see, what about in this situation, does that also happen, right? And that just feels like a great experience from the interviewer's point of view. They're like, oh wow, I really helped, that I'm having a good time. And actually, I will share a quick personal experience that I interviewed with Palantir a long time ago as a new grad. And I passed an interview and I did not get a single question right. And I might be exaggerating just a little bit to make this point, but it is genuinely what happened. I literally received a question and I had zero idea how to do it. And I just remember being completely stuck. But I remember the person like practically told me the answer. It was like literally one step from the answer. And I just remember being like, wow, that is so cool. Like, this is amazing that you can solve this way. I love these problems. And I actually just think that being enthusiastic and like just the most collaborative and showing that my love of problem solving is actually the thing that got me through that particular interview. And if you're not gonna, even if you aren't going to pass an interview, by doing things this way, you are going to enjoy it so much more, and you're so much more likely to learn something to improve your skills in preparation for the next opportunity, right? Um, oh, okay, this one's a good one too. Like, there's a huge culture of leak coding, and I'm not referring to specifically just leak code, the platform, but it's like all of the platforms where people are just kind of grinding like tough problems. In general, and it's kind of it's really not helpful to like your mentality because you look at a problem and you don't know how to solve it, and then it makes you feel like you're not ready or that you're not a good engineer. And it's not true. In general, most interviews are, first of all, a lot easier, to be honest, than like at least leak code hards, right? And the second thing is, um, a lot of times people are approaching these problems again from this like, oh, I must know the answer right away, right? In your practice session. And that's not true either, right? Like in the interview, you're going to have a long period of time where you don't know the answer. And just like when you're practicing, you should have a long period of time where you don't know the answer. And that's completely normal, right? And you're most likely going to get easier problems. And also, you're going to have your interviewer with you who is bouncing ideas back and forth with you, which is a very different experience than working on a problem in isolation. Because sometimes, like, you might solve a problem perfectly, but you have one mental block that, like, you didn't see the problem from a certain angle, and that prevented you from, it's like a binary, like you solved it or you didn't solve it, and it was all based on that one blocker, right? And if that's true, when you're practicing, you might not have gotten the answer, but in an interview, you would be like, your interviewer is working with you. Whether it's like a direct hint or not, they're collaborating, right? They might be like, oh, well, what about, that was a good thought, keep going there. Or like, here's another input that you can try, right? These are all like part of your actual experience. And I really love this point here of like, hey, it's so much, learning about how to solve these problems is so much more than just seeing correct like solutions to specific problems. Like, you really want to look at a higher level and understand what are the patterns here that are being used to solve like this general class of problem. So please do not evaluate yourself against the benchmarks of LeetCode. I would say I've spoken to a lot of engineers before, and even LeetCode easies, I hate this. They're not easy problems. Like, if a typical LeetCode easy problem is likely like year 3 of a CS degree, right? It's like most people spend years before they're even solving that level of problem. There are some easy LeetCode easies, but not all of them are easy at all. So don't use that as a ruler of where you are in the process. Um, Okay, super last tip before moving on to the next one is that I also find that people spend too much time on super hard problems. And in reality, I think you'll get more efficient practice actually by working on slightly easier problems that are more within your um, kind of matching your skill level a little more closely, because you can just get so much more iteration, right? Like, it might take you, I've seen people take 3 to 5 hours just to fully understand one solution that's really tough, and sometimes you need to do that, definitely sometimes. But, typically, like, it's better, I think, to get through, like, 10 problems and be able to iterate through them very quickly, easy problems that really help you hone your muscles, than spending all your time on hard problems only, which is practice that I just see a lot of people do. Okay, the next one is a super, I feel like I just really like making this point, so I made it into a slide, but I don't know why I really see this in particular for people coming from non-traditional backgrounds. I think it's because a lot of people haven't had as much experience working in a code base that's really high caliber. If you've worked at any, like, what any of these considered like top tier companies, the code bases are pristine when it comes to style. And you will get so used to seeing that level of polish that seeing code that doesn't match that, almost, it just sticks out like a sore thumb. And I think that it actually is kind of a constant distraction for the interviewer. And I like giving this tip because it is something that is fully, fully, fully under your control. Like, There's a lot of things that you're not going to control on your in your interview. Like sometimes you're just not going to come up with the answer, right? Like you're not going to make some of the connection. Like some of that is out of your control. You can practice, but you don't fully control it, right? And this is just like it's just making your spaces and capitalization correct. And what I try to get people to imagine is like, imagine you're reading a book and the formatting is all off, right? Some things are capitalized, some things are not capitalized. The indentation is different for every paragraph. There's different amounts of spaces between the words. Like that would just be so weird and distracting, right? You're like, I can't read this. That kind of is what it feels like when in an interview, like the style of the code is not good. And then final little tip on this slide is I feel like I notice a lot of people saying like, okay, great, I'll focus on style. I'm not going to do that during practice though. I'm just going to do that for the interview, right? Which makes a lot of sense. That's where it counts, right? But I would actually honestly flip that around. During an interview, your precious brain power needs to be spent on solving the problem. At that point, you really don't want to be distracted by spacing. And so at that point, just forget about it. Just focus on the problem, right? And so where you should actually practice this and hold yourself to a high bar is when you're practicing and there's no stakes, like you can take more time. Because when I write code for the first time, usually it's in pretty decent, almost perfect format by default. I'm so used to writing it that way that it's just like, um, I automatically, it's a habit of me to like fix little things and like write things in the correct format. It's no longer distracting to me, right? Think about the way you're typing. Like typing when you first learned the keyboard, it was constantly distracting. You didn't remember where keys were, right? Now, when most of us are typing, we probably touch type and don't remember don't even think about what letters are where, right? That's kind of where you want to be with like writing good styled code. Is make it automatic so it's not a distraction during the interview and you can really focus on the what actually matters, which ultimately is solving the problem. I actually have no idea what that acronym is that's being typed in the chat, so I will look it up. um, I don't know what it is, so I guess I don't think I use it probably. Um, okay, the next one is I'll spend a little less time on this one. I think there's a lot of people who are always asking, like, oh, like, which list should I go down? Should I do like line 75? Is that enough? Or should I do this list of like leak code problems, right? And I have so much to say about this, but oh, this is this slide I chose. Okay. Um, So, one of the things I have to say about this is I find that right now, the meta game is people are generally missing in technical communication. And that just happens to be where what I'm seeing in actual interview performances is I'm finding that because so many people are just practicing coding in isolation on leak code by themselves, they are actually a little algorithmically stronger, but missing a ton in terms of technical communication. And so um, I do think the technical skill is actually harder to build. And so it's not that you shouldn't be building that, but I'm finding that people are oddly lacking this because of where the culture is of how people are practicing. And so, a lot of times people are able to solve problems kind of on their own, but they have no ability to communicate what their approach is to a problem, right? And um and when they're walking through examples, for example, it like takes them a really long time, or they're stumbling with how to like move the cursors to show like how they're working through the problem. And a lot of that communication is forced upon you when you are solving the problem with another individual. And so the practical tip is to not kind of just practice in isolation on your own. And again, I think this does impact people from non-traditional backgrounds more because they've had less exposure to kind of the like if you've been in the last like 3 years, like so many and so many companies have been remote that like a lot of people who don't have more years of experience than that haven't really experienced um haven't really experienced working alongside other engineers. I think pair programming is actually fantastic for this. One of the things, if you're doing pair programming properly, is that there is like a navigator and a driver. Actually, the name I always get mixed up which one is which, but one of the person is actually coding. I think that's the driver, and then one person is like navigating. So as the navigator, you cannot actually code. You can only make progress in a particular problem by communicating technically, right? Like your ideas, like what you want to be done verbally. And so I think I think um, I think that does help quite significantly with this. The only thing I will say is pair programming. I feel like people generally are referring to like practical problems, like web development, pair programming, and I would encourage practicing like with more interview style problems, like how to communicate for those types of questions, because sometimes like there's like slightly different ways that you want to communicate your ideas. But I think I definitely plus one to the pair programming. Oh no, I'm running out of time. Okay. I think I have just one more. Let me check. Yeah. Okay. I really wanted to make sure I get to this slide because I think it's one of the honestly most relevant to anyone who comes from a non-traditional background, especially. I think this is truly one of the biggest missed opportunities for people, especially for people who have been to, any kind of boot camps, especially to anyone who has had any kind of prior profession before engineering. And if there's one thing I can help people from these backgrounds, it is definitely this. Um, you know, uh, people love to work with other people who love their work, right? And so the point is to give them a reason to make them believe that you love your work. And if you came from a different background prior to engineering, that is by default true, right? Because you have fought in a crazy uphill battle to become an engineer, right? Like there was not a path laid out for you. And I think that even going through traditional pathways, there's tons of challenges there. But if you became an engineer and you did not go through a traditional pathway, like it's easy. The story writes itself. Like you have overcome so many challenges to do this, and the challenges are different per person. But I've heard some people who like learn to code randomly on a job trying to solve a problem just for their normal day to day, right? I've worked with people who have built these crazy personal projects, right? Like I've spoken to people who have spent years contributing open source contributions, right? And I think that whatever challenge that you overcame, like you should mention that as like a way to highlight just, how it's like, I was talking to someone who's in theater, and he basically actually had this glove that he wanted to program as part of the performance. And I remember, and he was like, I had no idea. Like I literally had no idea how any of this worked. I didn't know how to a for loop work. And somehow I needed to make this glove like work for my performance. And I just remember saying to this person, don't you dare not mention that in any of your interviews ever. And and prior to me saying that, he just regularly missed that story, right? Um, the other thing that I would mention is that um, regardless of the challenge that you've overcome, you also have a really interesting story for like whatever your past profession is, right? Like I was talking to another person who recently was in the film industry and had worked on like like 12 to 16-hour film sets. And I'm like, do you think many engineers have had that experience, right? Like, not many, really few. And that experience isn't relevant to every company under the sun, for sure. But it is extremely valuable for a small set of companies, right? Like, I think any entertainment company, Formation, we work with Netflix on their hiring program, and I was thinking like, wow, like what a unique experience to have an engineer actually come from the film industry, right? Like that is invaluable. And so that part of your experience, it's extremely important. Number one, when you're cold reaching out to people to try to get interview opportunities, and number two, in the behavioral portions of your interview when you're first introducing yourself. Okay, I'm already over time, so I'm going to wrap up. But basically, the final point is please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and maybe mention that we connected over Techeria. I would love to get any of your feedback on this talk. If there's points that you agree or disagree with, I would love to hear that. If you have any further questions that I wasn't able to answer, please feel free to ping me directly on there. And if you're looking for any kind of help on the interview prep process, you can also consider Formation. But regardless of that, thanks for kind of joining me today, and I hope you learned a little bit something, and hope to connect with all of you. Have a great rest of your Thursday and rest of the conference.